Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. We're just going to give a few minutes. We have an incredible crowd today, and people are just coming in right now. So we're just giving people a couple of minutes to log in. We're actually starting a minute early because you guys were doorbusters. So we have a really great. I know I sound like a broken record because I say this all the time, but just a really great program today, and it's in response to just the high volume of requests that we've had from people to discuss the topic of gravitas. So it should be a great program. And Avril's done such a good job spreading the word about this that again, I know I say this every webinar, but this one truly is going to be a record-breaking webinar for the most people. So we'll see how Zoom does with this volume of people in our webinar. So again, the webinar today is the General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer Gravitas. Basically, we're going to describe why you need it, how do you earn it, and how do you keep it, which is critically important. A GC Advantage program that we have is basically a complimentary program that helps develop lawyers and compliance officers to be the best business-minded strategic partners they can be. People have recently been asking me, why do you call it GC Advantage? And the reason we call it the GC Advantage is if you hire a traditional executive coach, you get great coaching and leadership training and learning about polish and time management and things like that. But what the GC advantage is sitting down with people like Kristen Campbell who've been there and done it. You're really bringing a whole different perspective, really understanding how to work with the CEO, how to establish relationships with the board, how to work with the others on the leadership team, and then again, how to be the best business-minded strategic partner. Really, what we've been told by others is only someone who sat in a seat can bring this advantage. So we call it the GC advantage. The remarks we're getting from the people out there couldn't be stronger about how much the GC advantages help them develop professionally. We do have an upcoming webinar in April that's going to be about compliance, and we have some compliance all-stars, CCO all-stars that are going to be joining us for that. So interesting enough, if somebody's interested in compliance, being a CCO, developing the CCO relationships, some of the challenges that they're facing today, where the CCO seat's going tomorrow, definitely sign up for that. April 16th will be our next webinar. And then from question standpoint, we're happy to have people ask questions during the program. I will say to all the attendees, you guys did an amazing job. You really piled on the questions before we even got started here. I have tried to incorporate some of those questions into our program today, so we're going to answer a lot of them. But if you have a question, just scroll down, ask the question. We'll be viewing some of those questions during the program, and we're happy to try to get as many as we can. We will be finishing before the end of the hour so that we'll be completely on time. And I think time's just going to go by quickly. So if we don't get your question, if you ask a specific question and we don't get to it, feel free to send one of us a note. We'll get an answer out to you. So today I have the privilege of, and by the way, I'm John Gilmore. Been in this business now 36 years, so I've been around quite a while. I've seen it all. But joining us today, Kristen Campbell, who, Kristen, you don't have to ask about Gravitas when you meet Kristen. You go, oh, that's what Gravitas looks like. But interesting that the perspective that Kristen can give, and the reason we asked her is not only has she served as the general counsel of Staples and Hilton, she's also currently on two boards, Office Depot and Regency Centers, which is a very well-respected REIT. So having that combination of experience of general counsel and board, really a nice advantage for us to hear Kristen's side of the story. And then we're very fortunate that Dave Yaman is a member of our team, former general counsel of PepsiCo. And so it was just the gift that he did for us is inviting Andrea Ferrara, who was with PepsiCo for her entire career of 35 years as in human resources, and she just retired at the end of the year. So for fun, she's in her retirement. She's doing great things like this to help us out. So amazing to get the perspective of a CHRO who, when you're going through the interview for general counsel or even just a member of the leadership team that would be your peer, getting perspective from Andrea about what works, what doesn't work, what people, she's seen it all. So one of the questions I had to Andrea is, in 35 years, no one was able to lure you away from PepsiCo. And her comment was she was able to change jobs frequently, international positions and different positions, different businesses, food and beverage and so forth, without having to leave the company. So it really kept her engaged and happy to write out her career at PepsiCo. So thank you, Kristen and Andrea, for joining us today.
Thank you for
Nice
inviting
to be here.
And our head of marketing here, Barker Gilmore, pulled out this slide. He thought it was appropriate, talking about the lots of noise regarding Gravitas. And one of the things we looked at this year is so many people were changing positions. We had 68 positions, new Fortune 500s in 2024. And it was pretty much split a little bit more from the outside, 35 from the outside, 33 promoted from within. But one of the things reporters have been asking me about is what separates that person? What do they really get the position? And my comments are consistently, it's what's on the resume gets you to the table. It's what's not on the resume that gets you hired. And they're like, what do you mean by what's not on the resume? And really pointing to Gravitas. So we're happy to have a chance to chat about Gravitas today. We have several topics to cover, and we're going to be asking integrating some of the questions that you already asked into this discussion. But I'm really going to rely on Kristen and Andrea for their input and stories. So I'm going to kick it off with Kristen, and if people are saying, what is Gravitas? And I'd love to hear your definition of Gravitas besides just looking in the mirror and saying, there's Gravitas for you.
Thank you, John, and thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I especially want to echo what you said about having Andrea involved. I think it's so helpful to have her perspective on particularly this type of a seminar. I think what we don't want to do as legal professionals is to just kind of hear ourselves talk and not really get the perspective of others who might be around the organization or around the C-suite. So great to have you here, Andrea.
Thank you.
So John, it's such a great question. What is Gravitas? Because it is a bit of an intangible in some ways. And I've spent a lot of time preparing for this, thinking about exactly what it is. I looked it up in the dictionary and the new dictionary and the old dictionary, all of that. And then literally at 4 o'clock this morning, I had my eureka moment. Like it just came to me. So for those of you on the call who were not around in the 70s and 80s, I apologize, but you can go back on YouTube and find these. But there was a brokerage firm and investment banking firm called E.F. Hutton back in the day. They were ultimately swallowed up by another organization, but they had a great ad campaign in the 80s. And their tagline was, when E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. And John and Andrea, I don't know if you remember those.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
And it was always in the context of there was a huge crowd around, maybe it was a sporting event or a big party or something, and someone is telling his or her friend that their broker at E.F. Hutton said the following, and the whole room quiets because everyone wanted to hear what E.F. Hutton had to say. So to me, that is gravitas, when you can shut down a room, if you will, by what you have to say, that the weight, the gravity, which is where the word comes from, of course, and the impact of what you're saying really is powerful and important. And I think when we look at some of the traits that are involved and what brings gravitas to the table, I think there's 4 in my mind. The first is the leader who has a sense of true north all of the time. and who's known for having that sense of a true north. You know, they know who their client is, they know who their stakeholders are. And if they always cling to that, when, you know, when as you know, business goes, you can't always keep your eye on the ball all the time, but clinging to your true north will help you bring gravitas. I also think, you know, those people with gravitas, you'll find, are always very prepared and credible. They know what they're talking about. If they don't have answers, they don't talk, and they don't try to BS their way through, you know, through a statement. They will say, I need to go figure that out and I'll be back. Another element of gravitas, in my view, it's a strong one to me, is staying calm in a storm. My CEO at Hilton used to describe this as steady hands on the wheel. And I don't think I've ever had a discussion about leadership or, you know, building your executive presence without talking about remaining calm in the storm and steady hands on the wheel. And then finally, and this one is more of an art, I think this one comes, it's harder to learn, is really knowing your audience, and then being able to read the room and adjust your approach, you know, as you experience the external factors around you at any given moment. So John, in not so much of a nutshell, that's what I think gravitas is, and some of the key traits involved.
Yeah.
Hey, Kristen, can I just build? I agree with everything you said. I think a couple points. I mean, I think when Kristen talked about true north, I think that's super important. And I think it's super important, not just from knowing your clients and your stakeholders, but also a true north for yourself, right? The leaders that I've seen with amazing gravitas, and, you know, Dave Yaman was one of the GCs that I always looked up to. They're extraordinarily self-aware, and they really understand kind of their personal value system and what's important to them, and the way that they want to show up. And I think that some of those attributes that Kristen called out are the ones that I see really strong GCs demonstrate. The only add that I would bring is, I think this concept of connection, particularly in today's, you know, kind of corporate environment, is super important to help build gravitas and build that credibility and trust. And for me, it's about, how do you cast a shadow wider than kind of your normal, maybe, sphere of influence? You know, obviously you want to cast a shadow with the C-suite and with your team, but this concept of how do you cast this shadow wider, so that you have a bit more of a presence, is another way that you can get gravitas and momentum, which obviously leads to the credibility and trust.
Yeah. I like what you guys are saying as far as people being able to confidently say what they need to say, so that people listen to it and they say, that makes sense. That's perfectly, you know, that's the right thing to do. One of the knockout factors we often see on interviews, people go in, and if they act nervous, people are questioning, you know, does this person really know what they're doing? So I think, like you're saying, being calm and cool, the way you deliver that message makes a real big difference. Now, one question that we had come through multiple times was, is gravitas different for, say, you know, a large Fortune 500 like PepsiCo versus a, you know, Bay Area startup where everyone's wearing jeans and t-shirts to work? And I think they're mixing up the, you know, the dress code with gravitas, because gravitas goes a little bit deeper as far as how they deliver that message. But I'll let you guys talk about that. Like, what about gravitas? I mean, are you with me on that? That's not the difference. Gravitas isn't the difference. The person who comes in and speaks fluently at a fintech startup versus the person who comes in, they're different people with maybe different images, but the gravitas is probably the same.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start, Kristen, and then you can build. I mean, I think the point that Kristen made about, you know, your ability to read the room and assess and pivot, I actually think that's gravitas demonstrated perfectly, right? And I think, so for me, it's the underlying attributes don't change. It's the ability to have high EQ and quickly read the situation and then pivot, right? So if you've got a CEO that doesn't like direct feedback and you need to give him or her feedback, how do you pivot and do it in a way where it's not a direct hit, right? It's those kind of examples that I think you've got to flex. And so again, for me, it's not the what, it's the how you do it is where you want to practice and make sure that you're plugged into listening and observing and paying attention to sort of the hidden cues and the ways of working within an organization. Because I think that just helps you demonstrate those attributes that you have in a way that fits the culture and the environment in which you're sitting.
That's perfect.
I agree. Yeah, I agree completely with that, Andrea. And because I do think, gravitas is, I think it's a flexible term. But I do think that it is sort of universally perceived, regardless of what kind of enterprise that we're talking about. Now, I will say, just using an example, and I hope this is a safe example, but when I think about leaders, and I'm going to use Adam Newman, who was the founder of WeWork, back in the tech heyday. And, he used to come to investor meetings in his jeans. He had flip-flops on if he was wearing shoes at all. And the first thing they did was, and I have this on direct authority, although I was never part of one of these meetings, the first thing they would do is have a shot of tequila. I don't know that I would call that gravitas. I have some other descriptors for that. And at the same time, I can't deny he certainly influenced people to invest billions of dollars in an idea that he had. But I do think that is not really what we are talking about. And so because he was a kind of a tech high flyer, I still think if you want to make an impact in the tech world versus the consumer products world versus the government service world, whatever it is, I still think we're talking about similar traits and similar things you want to bring to the table for gravitas.
That's a perfect example. So the next question we're often asked is, can gravitas be learned? Now, before this, I did my own research, and I always preach about EQ because EQ is critically important for the GC function. That said, we'd talk about your IQ. You're born with it. You're not changing it. Your personality developed at a very early age, and before you're a teenager, your personality is your personality. EQ is something you 100% can modify. Now, I questioned if someone could really improve their gravitas, and what I learned through my research is absolutely can be improved. And great to know our advisors are out doing that on a regular basis with their clientele. So the answer is 100%. Yes, gravitas can be learned. Now, my question to Andrea and Kristen is, how is it learned? I mean, how do you take someone that has poor gravitas and bring it into the fold where they fit into that executive leadership team meeting or the board meeting?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I mean, I think first, I think it goes back to the concept of self-awareness, right? I mean, I think you actually need to spend the time and really understand, what motivates you? What are those values and attributes that are non-starters for you that's just kind of who you are. And the first thing you want to do is you have to make sure every day you live those attributes, right? So if it's about authenticity or courage or like those are your true north and you can never deviate, right? So I think that gives you the starting foundation. Then, I mean, these things may be kind of simple and small, but this concept of being like when you first learn how to drive a car, you remember like you get in and you check your mirrors and you did all these things. Now you get in the car and you're on the phone, you're not even paying attention, and you almost drive unconsciously. I think if you're trying to learn like how to have more gravitas, I think you have to switch a little bit and be a bit more conscious. And so some of the things I try to coach some of the leaders on were small things matter, right? With teams and individuals, like this concept of personal connections with people, remember small facts about people goes a long way. That's how you build relationships. That's how you build credibility. The second thing I'd say is be very purposeful in your words and your actions. People watch what you do, they watch what you say, they also watch what you don't do, and they watch what you don't say, right? And so be very thoughtful when you speak and do, because everybody's watching. The third thing I'd say is this concept of accessibility and visibility. I would try to go out of my way to create proactive time for you and your team so that people can reach you, right? And again, it's about casting a wide shadow. I think if you can do some of those things, it definitely helps improve your gravitas. And the last thing I'd say is I would always coach leaders on this one. I think we're always worried about the answers we give. I always tell people, think about the questions you ask as well, because it shows you're listening, and it's a way for you to connect. And I think those are some small things, John, that can help. But for me, it always started with really understanding kind of who you are and the value set that matters to you.
Yeah, it sounds like when I was looking into it, self-awareness, if self-awareness is off, there's no going further. So I
It's
think
super
the
hard.
first,
Yeah, it's super
Yeah.
hard.
what are your
Yeah.
thoughts,
So
Kristen?
yeah. So well, first of all, my first thought is, I wish Andrea had been around in my life when I was in my 20s, so she could have given me this kind of guidance, because it's really, really helpful and right on point. I would also just add that in terms, first of all, I'm glad your research showed what I believe and have experienced, John, that it can be learned. It's not necessarily an innate skill, although I think some people have come by gravitas more naturally than others. Although a quick side note on that I'll get to in a minute on introverts versus extroverts, because I think it's sort of an interesting topic. But I do think it can be learned, and I think in addition to the areas Andrea focused on, just some of the more tactical points is really work hard on your communication skills. For me, the areas where I've seen people make mistakes in the arena of executive presence and gravitas is talking too much, not knowing when to stop talking, or not knowing when to not talk at all. And I do think that legal professionals sometimes have a tendency to start from the very beginning of time, walk through how they got to the decision they got to, or the advice that they're getting to, and then by the time you're actually delivering the punchline, no one is really listening anymore, and that kind of goes to the credibility of the speaker. So I do think really working on your communication skills is critical. I think practicing, like when you have an important meeting or an important interview, practicing writing down bullet points on the points that you want to get across, very, very important. And also, just I would add, you don't learn this overnight if it doesn't come that naturally to you. I think seasoning, I love that word for leadership professionals, because seasoning, over time you really learn how to incorporate more gravitation or more gravity into what you're saying and what you're doing. And so give yourself some time, give yourself some practice for doing this. So quick thought on introverts and extroverts. There might be a belief that if you're more extroverted by personality, it might be easier to demonstrate, and learn gravitas. I'm not so sure that's really the case, because I think some of the most powerful leaders and the most gravitas-driven leaders I've ever worked with might be more on the introverted side. So just a plug for those of you who are more on the quiet side, as you look at your self-awareness and think about what your true north is, you don't have to be the life of the party to have gravitas.
Yeah, I just would say on the introverted side is that if you're looking to be sitting in that GC position, you need to be able to sell yourself or sell your ideas. And if you're falling short in that area, unfortunately, it's not going to serve you well. One other analogy that I happened to read up that I thought was great is imagine when you go to high school or college, the first couple years, you're not the person who's going to walk the halls and be the center of influence, or the one everyone's pointing to that they want to grow up to be like. But when you're a junior, senior, that all of a sudden you know the system, you know the people, you're a lot more confident, and you come across and people will point to you and say, wow, this person's someone that I really want to emulate. So I like that idea. Just sometimes it's just a matter of progressing as you build confidence and learn the organization that you're with.
Mhm.
Now, the next topic, and these are such great stories that it's gonna, I just don't want to delay, so we're gonna start speeding up a little bit. The followership and the importance of followership, and that was a term that we heard from Andrea in our prep meeting, and we're all like, wow, followership, that is exactly what it's all about, is getting people to stand behind you. So I'm gonna let Andrea start off with followership and understanding what's the difference between followership and gravitas, and what happens if someone has great gravitas but not followership. So I think followership is just so key.
Yeah, I've always been a big proponent. I mean, in my opinion, like leaders that have great followership can carry the day, right? Because it's a little bit of what gives you license to do so many other things, right? And when I think about followership, it's the ability to have people that you don't necessarily have direct impact on believe in you and follow you and listen to you, right? And I think the way I've watched leaders do that is to be extraordinarily consistent in how they lead and how they connect and how they handle situations. And so I think if I go back to kind of Kristen's definition of what gravitas looks like, this optimism, this confidence, this composure, people want to see leaders that have that in a consistent basis, right? It's always like you don't want to have to come in and wonder, is John in a good mood or is Kristen in a bad mood, and not know how to react. And so what I watched was these leaders that spent the time and they cast wide shadows and they spent time outside of their normal areas of influence and they networked. And by networking and delivering great results and other things that they touched, they started to get this positive momentum. And then what you realize is when you start to get positive momentum, I always say every news travels fast. Good news and bad news travels fast throughout organizations. And what you want is everybody tells somebody something good about you. And there's a story and it's about me, and I don't mean it to be that like I had wonderful gravitas and followership, but it was a super telling experience for me of this concept that everybody is watching. And so you have opportunities to create followership every day, even when you're walking down the hall. And so the story is, obviously I've been at PepsiCo a long time, and they give you these ID badges. And my ID badge over the years had just gotten smudged and you could barely see my picture. And one day when I was walking in, I somehow lost my badge. So I went to security and got a new one. And the first day I wore that new badge, I had 7 employees come up to me and say, "Hey, you got a new ID badge." And these were not my direct reports. They were not my executive committee members. These were just employees that knew who I was. And so it was such a powerful reminder for me that how you show up and how you interact, even in the lunchroom, it matters, right? And if you can do it in a consistent way and you stay true to your values and you're very approachable and you're very visible, I think that's how you create strong followership. And strong followership gives you license and it gives you grace.
Yeah.
And I think on those days where you might have a bad day, things get forgiven when you have strong followership. So that's kind of, John, how I would define it.
That sounds great. And I have another story to tell. Is within a day or two after you talking about followership, I had a meeting with a Fortune 500 general counsel who been with the same company for 20 years, started as a head of securities law, moved into corporate secretary role, and then promoted to general counsel. And I'm like, wow, I go, in all those years, nothing's lured you away. And he goes, I just have had such loyalty to these people because they treated me so well that I haven't, there's nothing good enough for me to leave. And he went on to share this story. He said when he was a head of securities law, he goes, we had a major issue, had to do an SEC refiling. He goes, it's Sunday, I'm in the office with the CFO and we're working on this project. And he goes, about 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, the general counsel came in, saw them working and said, is there anything I can do to help? And they're like, no, we've got this. Go do whatever you have to do. We're good. And general counsel wound up going home and doing things with his family and came back at 5 o'clock and said, my God, you guys are still in the same room. Have you left the room? And they go, no, we haven't left all day. We're still working on it. And anything I can do to help? No. We've got this. We just have to plow through it. And the GC said, well, have you eaten? And they go, no, we haven't eaten. He goes, let me go out and get you a meal. And he comes back with a couple meals. This is like 20 years later. The guy tells this story and he's like, from that day forward, I knew I would work for him forever until he got promoted to the general counsel retired. He took his position. But he goes, the way I treat my team is the exact same way. I learned that lesson from that general counsel. And he goes, since I've been general counsel, he goes, no one has ever left the company. So it's amazing. You're talking about what does followership give you? It gives you a team that will do above and beyond expectations for you and the organization, but also they stick around. So, you know, the followership is very heavy stuff. So sorry I didn't get your input, Kristen, but I had to get that story out. And
I
I'm
think
going to
you
let
guys
you
said a
talk
lot.
about building the gravitas to influence the executive leadership team. I mean, help us tell a few stories where maybe you had to influence the others, or you did influence the others, either on a leadership team or the board, or maybe even in the boardroom today, talking in terms of, you know, what your expectations are of the general counsel and where do they really need to flex and where don't they?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think thinking back on experiences I had where I felt, you know, I wanted to elevate the view that folks had of me on the business side. You know, I do think it kind of goes back to so many of the things we've already been talking about. But one thing I remember is as I was working my way up, and I was fairly senior, I was VP or SVP level, but I was working with a new group of business partners with a company we had acquired, company that my company had acquired overseas. And the new business leaders all were from different countries, different European countries. And so I worked very hard to put together a presentation that had a few things in each of their languages, including the salutation, good morning, or, you know, whatever. And I think I don't know that it elevated my the way they perceived me, but they sure noticed me, and they really appreciated what they viewed as, you know, they've just been gobbled up by a big American company, and at the same time, someone was really like understanding that they were, you know, they had individual personalities, they were running individual businesses, they had individual cultures that they were coming from, and so I you know, I had some feedback after that was very positive. It was like, thank you for respecting us. And, you know, I think those are the types of things that you don't necessarily think as I'm giving legal advice. And so therefore, you know, therefore that's how I build my gravitas. I think it was a little bit more, you know, something that just demonstrated I care and that people matter. And that I respected them. And I think that both goes to building gravitas, your reputation for gravitas, but also your followership, right? I mean, I grew a few fans out of that, as I was later told. And then just briefly, I'd also say, clearly the time for building gravitas is when you're having a tough situation. Whether it's a refiling with the SEC, heaven forbid, or something, you know, difficult litigation, or, you know, I worked a lot, Andrea, with HR professionals on difficult departures, employee departures, those types of things. I think, again, being really present in the moment, and preparing yourself as best you can, but also remaining calm, as I said earlier, steady hands on the wheel, will really help, in those situations where you have to make some tough calls. One that I will just harken back to for a minute is this public information. My company at the time had a data breach back in 2015, and it was a really scary time. It was kind of early in the data breach cycle before it seemed like it was happening every other day to every company. And some of the moments, within that difficult time organizationally, I think really built my gravitas within the organization, but the gravitas of others on my team and, in other departments as well. So when times are tough, it's the time to demonstrate what you've got.
One question that people were asking is, how do you demonstrate all this confidence when you're new to the business? And you're the perfect person to ask it. You go from office products to hospitality to the REIT business, and you're sitting in those rooms. I mean, are you just you fake it till you figure it out, or I mean, what's it like going from one business to the next and walking in the door? Are you like the freshman in high school that I talked about, or what's it like?
Yeah, well, hope not. And Andrea's, I think, point of view would be really interesting on this, because I'm sure PepsiCo brought a lot of, other industries into the business. But I say this about every position, but particularly in the legal department, lawyers and GCs cannot gain credibility with their business. They cannot have gravitas if they don't understand the business deeply. Yeah. So the first thing you do is, learn the business, whether it means going and working in a hotel or working in a retail store or getting out in the field for a sales call or whatever it is. You need to work really hard to learn the business. And then, I think there's a lot of other things you can do to help build your credibility as you enter an organization, like, get to know people, have one-on-ones with the other executives or your peers or your seniors or your juniors, whatever. But the most important thing is to be credible about, the advice that you're giving. And you can only do that if you know what the business is all about.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. That's absolutely foundational. I mean, just a couple ads, Kristen, because I thought that was spot on. I mean, I think, one of the things I'd always try to coach our new GCs on was just understand the audience, right? I mean, especially when you're talking about CEOs, self-preservation rules the day. So make sure you understand people's agendas and understand how they best operate, because that way you can navigate and you can kind of pivot and you have the lay of the land. Learn how people like to solve problems. Does the CEO like to do it in a team environment or one-on-one? Does he or she manage better in smaller groups or in big groups? So try to understand that and really spend the time to understand the ways of working in your organization. Are there meetings before the meetings? It's all of those kind of cultural pitfalls that I think also, the quicker that you can figure that stuff out, the better. And, what I'd always try to do is, it sounds kind of corny, but I'd always give the new GC or the new executive a peer coach, somebody that I trusted, that they could trust, and sort of, walk out of the meeting and go, what the hell was that all about? Right. And then they get the debrief so that they understand. So the sooner you can sort of understand the lay of the land and the cultural nuance, I think all of that just helps you begin to navigate and pivot, which is really what Gravitas is about.
Yeah. What about
really
an executive coaching others on their team on Gravitas? Some people had asked questions about, well, they were a little bit afraid that someone might be offended when you say someone, so you need to improve your Gravitas, you're not a good communicator or whatnot. I mean, is that just silly? I mean, or is it just direct? I like your idea of having a peer that could work with someone, but at the same time, you need someone who is unafraid to say, wow, you know, you really need to work on this area. And some people, maybe as peers or so forth, might not. I think that's why people get an outside coach who they don't know from the
Mhm.
from any other reasons. But Andrew, what are your thoughts about that as far as you know, the people in you? I saw your organization, for example, you kept climbing the ladder to the CHRO position. I mean, I'm sure you had people along the way that you had to coach or be just truthful to. I mean, talk about that. Like what?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think this might be a little contrarian, but I think as leaders, you've got to figure out your coaching style that works for you, right?
Mhm.
And then I also think you have to match that with understanding the person that you're trying to coach. Because if you're a pretty direct person, sometimes a direct hit on somebody is devastating, right? Like you have no gravitas could cripple someone, right? And so I think what you actually want to do is really understand kind of how that person reacts to feedback and then plan your coaching conversation accordingly. And I think the word gravitas can scare people. I mean, we tend to call it, hey, we want to enhance your presence or your executive presence, and we want to enhance it, not that you don't have any, right? And I think small sort of tweaks like that matter. Now, I mean, if you do that and the person still doesn't respond, then you probably have to hit them harder. But my going in, the way I would coach executives and leaders was to try to be a little bit softer and make it something that wasn't so scary, because gravitas and executive presence can be nebulous and people don't really understand it. And so I would give people one or two things to try to improve with one or two ways to do it, and then let them go practice.
That's good.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's,
and I think I agree with all of that, and I'd probably add just a couple of things, which I do think kind of the softer approach, or not softer is the wrong word, but the more supportive approach is the right way to start things out. I always would take as a two things. I'd talk about executive presence. Those were the words that I've always used, Andrea, as well, and um, I always talked about it as an opportunity, because I think as a positive one, because lawyers get in-house lawyers, I think, get frustrated when our clients aren't responsive. They don't want to take our advice. They question everything we bring, to the table. And I think having a stronger executive presence and gravitas is going to change the game on how your business partners want to work with you, and how more receptive they're going to be to the advice that you're giving. So I always thought it was like, let's talk about how we can have more impact with our business partners. Let's talk about the ways in which we can help them problem solve, because that really, at the end of the day, is in my view, it's the key goal of in-house counsel, just sort of keeping us within the bounds of the law. And so, I think it can really be positioned as a positive. And I also would try to, like, if I was in a meeting and someone didn't demonstrate executive presence, I would, as soon as we could regroup after that meeting or presentation or whatever, I would just try to give them a little friendly coaching in real time, so you could really understand the difference between what they said, and then maybe how they could have done it a little bit differently.
Exactly. And that actually leads into our next category, is establishing your role as a trusted advisor. People were asking, if you have a CEO that treats you as a lawyer only and not a trusted advisor, what are some tips or tricks to change that? And interesting enough, I probably person could be on this call, but I had someone yesterday articulating a situation where they're in that seat managing the day-to-day law department, but the CEO turns to another very heavyweight person and that's not even in the organization as that advisor. And so what would the tips are, and saying to me, I think it's time to leave. I think it's time to go somewhere else. So because of that, and I mean, instead of just abandoning ship, what do you think someone could do when you have a CEO that seems hardline like that they don't want to turn to you, but they want to turn to you know, maybe a peer or a former executive that they maybe even outside counsel who they've played golf with for 20 years, and they treat them like the advisor versus their sitting GC.
There's
You-
lots to
yeah, you
unpack
want-
there. Yeah,
Go ahead. You want me to go or you want to go?
go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough situation, right? And I mean, I think there's two ways you can go about doing this, right? I think at least in my opinion, I mean, I think the first thing I would try to do is I would try to create pull with the CEO through my peers on the executive committee, right? Which is figuring out how you can help your peers with a non-legal business problem, right? Look, you guys are all super smart, right? I've never met a general counsel or a senior, a senior legal leader that didn't have a super high IQ, right? And so you have the ability outside your swim lane to have business impact. And I think you can't ever forget that. And so what I would try to do is see if there's a way you can get pull with your peers, because then your peers will say something hopefully to the CEO. I mean, I've done that a couple times with leaders that have struggled getting footing with CEOs. When that didn't work, I don't think you have much to lose to sit down with the CEO and just have the conversation, right? Now, how you do that, you've got to be thoughtful and purposeful, but at some point in time, you've got to break that through, and maybe it's something he or she's doing and they don't even realize it, right? I think those would be my two ways of advising. I'd probably take the first option first to try to have my peers help create the pull by demonstrating I have more capacity outside of just the legal space. But if that doesn't work, I'd probably hit it head on.
Yeah, I think that's the best advice you could have given anyone is take that path first and hope it bleeds over to the CEO and others on the board. So
yeah. And I'd add to that, John, I mean, my off the cuff response to your initial question was get a new CEO. But that doesn't always work. I understand.
No, it does not.
And I think, deeply embedded in that question is what do you do in an organization that doesn't value the legal team as a true strategic business partner? And can that be fixed? And the answer is it depends. It really, it depends on whether this is a personality problem with the CEO or whether the CEO just really doesn't think, that the legal team can bring more than just, pure legal advice and not really be part of a problem solving team or a team that really accelerates getting business done. I mean, that's really what everyone is there for. So I think Andrea's tactics make perfect sense. One of my coaches, or my leadership development coach back in my early 40s, one of her first pieces of advice to me was find your allies within the organization. That doesn't mean the people that you go gossip with, or because you shouldn't be gossiping anyway. But find the people who really, who actually do believe in what you are bringing into the organization, and align with them, and hopefully those folks are aligned with the CEO as well. The other thing is the GCs have other C-suite members have the same thing, but we do have a kind of a special relationship with the board. And I think if you can strengthen your relationship with board members, that can also help your relationship with the CEO. The opposite can be true as well. So you have to be very careful about that. But, I think that if the board really can see you as a strategic leader and advisor, then the CEO is probably going to have to follow along at some point as well.
yeah. The next topic, which I know everyone loves a few tips when thinking about interviewing, is the key success factors for CEO interviews. And I mean, you guys have said it a bunch of times that coming in confident and well-spoken, and I think the biggest word that I've heard over and over again is being authentic. And I'll give you an example too. I had a very authentic candidate go in and not do well on the interview, and that candidate went and had every answer that they were going to, every scenario, do a little prep, memorized. And so questions asked and they answer it. Questions asked, they answer it. I mean, there's a little bit of acting involved when you're interviewing here. It's like, huh, that's a great question. Even though you have to, it has to be perceived that you're giving a thoughtful answer. So that I would just say, it needs to be a good natural two-way conversation where you're doing half the talking, they're doing half the talking. The candidate who does more than 50% of the talking is talking too much. The candidate who's not talking 50% of the time is talking too little and not showing what they're made of. So that's not good either. But I know both of you have sat in the boardroom for these interviews, and you've watched plenty of people fumble. What I find is lawyers love more of what they did wrong than what they could do right. So, what's your instant turnoffs when you have someone come in and you go, okay, this person's not going to work?
Gosh, John, again, a lot of fun things to unpack there. I would say, again, you're right. You need to be your authentic self. I do think you have to be very prepared, but part of the preparation for that is being able to pivot and being flexible with whatever questions are being thrown at you, because I don't think you can necessarily prepare for every single question. But the other thing I would advise is the CEO may not ask you what he or she may not ask you the questions that you want to answer. So I would always try to find a way there were points that I wanted to make about my background, my experience, what I could bring to the table. And if they didn't get asked in a certain way, then I would always find another way to work those topics into the conversation. But your point, I think, is a good one, which is it really needs to be a conversation, especially when we're talking about C-suite or very senior positions, because a CEO wants to know they can just have a real strong conversation with you, and that it's not going to be just a rote exercise. So the one question I'd love to hear Andrea's response on this. The one question that gets asked a lot is, what's the worst thing about you, or tell me one negative thing about you, or something that you think is an opportunity area for yourself. Because I think we all have a hard time. I've always had a hard time answering that question and still appearing confident. So how do you navigate that one, Andrea?
Yeah, I've actually always hated that question, right?
Me
Because
too.
it's just setting somebody up to take it on the chin. But no, I mean, like whenever I ask that question, I'm super honest, and I'm not, and maybe it's the wrong way to do it, but I've always been like, yeah, like I have crappy attention to detail. And you know how I get around that is I put people on my team that maniacally offset my weaknesses. Right. And so I would sort of say what it was, and then I would talk about how I kind of counterbalanced it. I think that's the best strategy, because if you try to fake and go, well, I don't, or you give some kind of I don't have good time, man, like something that no one's going to buy, then you just look disingenuous. So I would say what it is, and then talk about how you proactively make sure that it's not a problem.
Yeah. My favorite answer to that one is always, "Oh, I'm such a workaholic."
That one just rolls. Everyone rolls their eyes when you
exactly.
Who isn't though?
I do like the advice you just gave, but that is the CEO's favorite interview question. What are your weaknesses? And and the people that give a weakness that is imperative for being a good general counsel, like, well, public speaking is one of my weaknesses, but I have a coach and I'm getting better. Needless to say, you're done. I mean, you're automatically out. So if you give a weakness that is a requirement of someone being a good general counsel, it's not going to work. My personal advice on that is identify something that maybe you needed some additional development, and instead of saying, here's my weakness, here's an area that I thought I needed more exposure to. I never really sat in the business, so I left the business to become this senior vice president of a business to learn the business better. And what that enabled me to do is see both sides of the table and be able to be a better GC. So my advice is not say, here's my weakness today, I'm going to be bringing it with me on my first day, is to say, this was an area I identified for development. Here are the actions that I took. and now why it's made me such a better person. So that's my tip on that. And we are out of time, and so we're gonna close this discussion. I know there's a lot of questions here, and I apologize. We knew that's going to be like this, but we'll try to get some of these. We always do a follow-up. One of my favorite interview questions, by the way, I've always talked about this, is, you know, how have your responsibilities evolved since you started working with the company? You're looking at Andrea, and boy, because she probably had, I'm going to probably undersell it, 12 positions at PepsiCo before she hit the top. And people that are talking in terms of taking on new responsibilities, whether in legal or whether outside of legal with the business, is always a big thing. I just stumbled when I was looking at someone's LinkedIn profile. They had the quote that, you know, it's kind of like, you know, don't doubt yourself or put yourself down. And it said, growth happens when you start doing the things you're not qualified to do. So, you know, again, coming to the table, talking in terms of how you took on other things, how you showed the initiative. It wasn't just people asking you to do something, but raising your hand to do things, doing more than just the same job. If I ask you, how have your responsibilities evolved in the last 20 years with this company? And you said, well, I pretty much have been doing the same thing. Just so you know, you will not be a candidate for the position. So, you know, you want to proactively seek these things out. Everyone talks about it, but I love this line about, you know, growth only happens when you start doing things you're not qualified to do. Take things that are just completely out of your comfort zone, master them. That just being able to master it says so much about you. So, anyway. So Andrea and Kristen, your words of wisdom are unbelievable, and the stories are worth their weight in gold. So we really appreciate you joining us. We will, as always, we will have this recorded and up on our website in no time. And our marketing, Gordon, will be putting together a really great white paper on this topic, and we'll have it out there for you to share with people on your team. Maybe you have some people that you know that need a little kick in the pants when it comes to Gravitas, to be worth sharing to them. And so again, keep in mind, we do have a good lineup of webinars coming your way. And we'll be looking forward to helping you advance your career, become the best business-minded strategic business partner that you possibly can be. One more plug. Again, you see the value of these executive coaches who've sat in the seat. If anyone out there is really looking to up their game, sitting with someone who's been in the seat of a Fortune 500 and working with sophisticated boards, I just can't explain the value. We do a survey after every single engagement, and our executive advisors, it's 5 for 5 out of the last 5 stars out of 5 for the last 5 years. Everybody just feels that they're getting more than their money's worth, and almost everyone wants to renew and get additional coaching. So coaching is not a sign of weakness. Coaching is a sign you want to do better. So which everyone should want to do. And then on the executive search side, we're very busy. We're always interested in hearing from people about what their career aspirations are. My advice is be open-minded to opportunities when you don't need an opportunity. You know, don't wait until the transaction's closed and you're out of a job, or you had a new CEO that changed the leadership team. You know, be proactive, at least be on the radar. All you have to do is say no interest when the right opportunity, when an opportunity comes by, but you never know when that perfect scenario is going to hit you. So we're happy whether you're a candidate looking for opportunity, or if you hear of anyone saying, hey, I'm looking to make a strategic hire, who would you recommend? Boy, we really appreciate referrals. So referrals mean everything to us. So anyway, thank you again for attending. April, I think we did have a record breakout crowd today, so we really appreciate everyone here. Hope you learned a lot from it.
Thanks, John. Thanks,
Have a good
Andrea.
day.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.